Hey there, fam. meodentv here with today's hot political takes. Alright folks, let's get into the latest twist in Trump's trade war saga. Why he's suddenly scrambling to find allies in his showdown with China, and whether America is really trying to win its friends back. So here's the deal. After 3 months of throwing insults, slapping tariffs, and even threatening to annex some of its closest allies, the Trump administration is now realizing they might need a little help. President Trump has kicked his trade clash with China into high gear, but he's looking a bit lost on how to actually win this fight. Now his team is racing to figure out how to build some leverage against Chinese President Xi Jinping, who, by the way, isn't in the mood to bow to Trump's tough guy tactics. But there's a strategy that might just work. It would tap into America's global power and influence, potentially putting enough pressure on Beijing to address long-standing U.S. gripes, like market access, intellectual property theft, industrial espionage, and other trade issues. Sounds good, right? Well, there's a catch. This approach totally clashes with Trump's America First motto that he's been preaching since day one. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent dropped some hints on Fox Business this week, saying the U.S. is gearing up for trade talks with allies like Japan, South Korea, India, and even Vietnam. Everyone's coming to the table, and basically, China is surrounded, Bessent said with a grin. He went on to lay out the big goal. How do we get China to rebalance? That's the big win here. Meanwhile, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt got grilled on Friday about why U.S. allies would even bother helping out against China when Trump's been treating friends and foes the same. Her answer? You'll have to talk to our allies who are reaching out to us. The phones are ringing off the hooks. They've made it very clear they need the United States, our markets, and our consumer base. Sounds like a party, but here's the problem. Since Trump got back in the Oval Office, he's been doing everything he can to burn bridges with like-minded democracies. Just this week, he took several swings at the European Union, saying, "I always say it was formed to really do damage to the United States in trade." Ouch. And he's not the only one with a grudge against Europe. Vice President J.D. Vance has been pretty vocal about his dislike for the continent, both at the Munich Security Forum and in a group chat about airstrikes in Yemen. Trump's not exactly winning hearts in the Western Hemisphere either. A strong, unified North American trade bloc could have been a solid wall against China, but Trump keeps threatening to take over Canada and has hit Mexico with some of his harshest tariffs yet. Canada's new Prime Minister Mark Carney didn't mince words, warning that the traditional relationship with Washington is denizo. Now, the idea of rallying allies to push China into better trade practices is so smart, you'd think it was a no-brainer. But here's the kicker. Someone did think of it before, and Trump killed it. Back on day one of his first term in 2017, he pulled the U.S. out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, a 12-nation group that included allies like Mexico, Canada, Japan, and Australia, but not China. He also scrapped the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, which would have linked the world's two biggest markets. Those deals could have been game changers for building a united front against China, but Trump wasn't having it. So now the big question is, has Trump pushed America's friends so far away that they won't even pick up the phone? Jason Furman, who chaired the Council of Economic Advisors under Obama, didn't hold back when he spoke to CNN on Thursday. The U.S. right now is an incredibly unreliable partner to anyone in the world, and I don't know how we're going to get back to being reliable. That's a tough pill to swallow, and it looks like Trump's got some serious bridge mending to do if he wants to win this trade war with China. Let's dig deeper into Trump's withdrawal from the Trans-Pacific Partnership, TPP, back in 2017, and compare it to the current trade war landscape in 2025. Buckle up, this is a wild ride through trade policy and global economics. Trump's TPP withdrawal in 2017. What went down? Trump made waves on January 23, 2017, just days after taking office, by signing an executive order to pull the U.S. out of the TPP, a 12-nation trade deal that included countries like Japan, Canada, Mexico, Australia, Vietnam, and more, but notably not China. The TPP, negotiated under Obama, was a big deal, covering about 40% of global trade. It aimed to slash tariffs, set high labor and environmental standards, and counter China's growing influence in the Asia-Pacific by letting the U.S. lead the way on global trade rules. Obama had pitched it as a way to ensure the United States, and not countries like China, writes this century's rules for the world's economy. But Trump wasn't having it. He called the TPP a rape of our country during his campaign, arguing it would kill American jobs by letting low-wage countries like Vietnam and Malaysia outcompete U.S. workers. On his first full day in office, he signed the order, saying it was a great thing for the American worker. The move was largely symbolic, since Congress hadn't ratified the deal, but it sent a clear signal. Trump was done with multinational trade agreements, favoring one-on-one deals instead. He also scrapped the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, TTIP, which would have linked the U.S. and EU markets. The withdrawal wasn't just a domestic flex, it had big, global ripples. Allies like Japan and Australia were left scrambling, and many worried it signaled a U.S. retreat from Asia, opening the door for China to step in. The remaining 11 TPP nations didn't just sit around. They forged ahead with a new deal, the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, CPTPP, which kicked in on December 30, 2018, without the U.S. China, meanwhile, pushed its own trade pact, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, RCEP, which launched in 2020 with 15 Asia-Pacific countries, again excluding the U.S. Critics like Senator John McCain warned at the time that pulling out would hurt the credibility and standing of the U.S. in Asia, while others, like Bernie Sanders, cheered it, saying trade deals like TPP had devastated working families by costing jobs. Economists and trade experts had mixed takes. Some, like Maria Solis from the Brookings Institution, argued that TPP would have boosted U.S. industries by opening markets for competitive sectors like tech and agriculture, while also pressuring China to reform its trade practices. Others pointed out the deal's flaws, like the Investor-State Dispute Settlement ISDS system, which critics said let corporations challenge U.S. laws, echoing Trump's claim that it undermined sovereignty. On the flip side, withdrawing meant U.S. farmers and businesses lost out on lower tariffs in CPTPP markets, leaving them at a disadvantage compared to competitors in Australia or Canada, who now enjoy better access to places like Japan. The 2017 trade war, how it played out. Trump's TPP exit was just the opening act of his trade war, which really heated up in 2018. He slapped tariffs on $350 billion worth of Chinese goods, starting with 25% duties on steel and aluminum, then escalating to cover everything from tech to consumer goods. China hit back with tariffs on $110 billion in U.S. exports, targeting things like soybeans and pork, hitting American farmers hard. Trump's goal was to force China to stop what he called unfair practices, like intellectual property theft and forced tech transfers, while also reducing the U.S. trade deficit with China, which was around $419 billion in 2018. The trade war caused chaos. U.S. consumers faced higher prices as companies passed on tariff costs. Think pricier electronics and toys at Walmart. Farmers in places like Iowa, who'd backed Trump in 2016, got crushed as China slashed imports of U.S. pork and soybeans. Some lost up to 50% of their export markets. By 2019, the U.S. had to roll out $28 billion in farm bailouts to offset the damage. Meanwhile, China's economy took a hit too. Its growth slowed to 6.1% in 2019, the lowest in decades. But Beijing doubled down, boosting domestic industries and pivoting to other markets like the EU and Southeast Asia. Globally, the trade war sparked fears of a broader economic slowdown. Supply chains got messy as companies started shifting production out of China to places like Vietnam and Mexico to dodge tariffs, a trend called decoupling. By January 2020, Trump and China signed a Phase 1 deal, where China agreed to buy $200 billion more in U.S. goods over 2 years, but many core issues, like tech transfers, remained unresolved. Analysts later found China only met about 58% of its purchase commitments by 2021. The current trade war in 2025, where we're at now. Fast forward to April 2025, and Trump's trade war with China has reached a whole new level of intensity. After returning to office, Trump didn't waste time. He's cranked up tariffs on Chinese imports from 54% to a staggering 125% on top of existing levies. China's retaliated with 84% tariffs on all U.S. imports, upping the ante in what's now a full-on economic showdown. This escalation is moving way faster than in 2017 to 2018, with tariffs jumping 71 percentage points in just a week compared to the gradual rollout back then. The stakes are higher now, too. The US and China are more entrenched in their rivalry, not just economically, but geopolitically. Nick Morrow from the Economist Intelligence Unit calls this the strongest indication yet of a hard decoupling, where the two economies could end up with almost no trade or investment ties. That's a big shift from 2017, when the focus was more on renegotiating trade terms rather than a total break. Back then, Trump's tariffs were about pressuring China to change. Now, they seem aimed at cutting China out of U.S. markets entirely, even if it means massive collateral damage. The economic fallout in 2025 is already looking brutal. J.P. Morgan estimates this could hit U.S. consumers with an $860 billion tax hike as prices soar for goods that can't be quickly replaced, like electronics, shoes, and solar panels, which China's long dominated. In China, millions could lose jobs, and a wave of bankruptcy might hit suppliers, as Victor Shi from UC San Diego predicts. U.S. exports to China could go close to zero, a sharper drop than the 20% decline in 2019 during the first trade war. But China's better prepared this time. They've cut reliance on U.S. exports from 19% of their total in 2018 to under 15% now, and they've built up trade with the EU, Southeast Asia, and RCEP countries. Trump's also trying a new tack in 2025, cozying up to allies to gang up on China. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said on Fox Business that the U.S. is in trade talks with Japan, South Korea, India, and Vietnam, aiming to surround China and force it to rebalance its trade practices. That's a stark contrast to 2017, when Trump ditched the TPP and alienated allies by focusing on bilateral deals. Back then, he burned bridges, threatening to annex Canada and slamming the EU as a trade enemy. Now he's trying to rebuild those bridges, but it's a tough sell. Allies are wary after Trump's flip-flops, and as Jason Furman told CNN, the U.S. is seen as an incredibly unreliable partner. Compare that to 2017, when allies like Japan were still hopeful the U.S. might rejoin the TPP. Trump even floated the idea in 2018, but never followed through. China, meanwhile, is playing a savvier game in 2025 than in 2017. Back then, they were caught off guard by Trump's tariffs and scrambled to respond. Now they've been prepping for this moment for years, since Trump's first trade war and his crackdown on Huawei. They've diversified supply chains, set up factories in places like Vietnam, and boosted tech self-sufficiency with AI and semiconductors. Xi Jinping's betting China can outlast the U.S. in this war of attrition, as economist Kai Tong-Wan put it, thanks to the Communist Party's ability to weather economic pain without voter backlash, unlike U.S. politicians who face re-election pressure. Key comparisons: 2017 versus 2025. Scale of tariffs. In 2017 to 2018, Trump's tariffs on China started at 25% and eventually covered $350 billion in goods. In 2025, they've skyrocketed to 125% in a matter of weeks, showing a much more aggressive approach. Allies' role. In 2017, Trump went solo, ditching the TPP and straining ties with allies. In 2025, he's trying to rally Japan, South Korea, and others to pressure China, though trust issues linger. China's preparedness. China was reactive in 2017, struggling to pivot. By 2025, they're proactive, less reliant on the U.S., with stronger trade ties elsewhere and a more resilient domestic economy. Economic impact. The 2017 trade war raised U.S. consumer prices by about 0.4% and cost farmers billions. But 2025's escalation could hit Americans with an $860 billion price tag and push U.S.-China trade to near zero. Global dynamics. In 2017, the TPP withdrawal let China fill the void with RCEP. In 2025, China's already entrenched in Asia-Pacific trade networks, and the U.S. is playing catch-up with allies who are now skeptical. Trump's TPP withdrawal in 2017 set the stage for today's mess by weakening U.S. leverage in Asia and emboldening China. Now in 2025, he's trying to fix that mistake by rallying allies. But the damage might already be done. China's dug in, the U.S. is bleeding economically, and the world's watching to see who blinks first in this high-stakes trade war. Thanks for sticking with us until the end of this segment. meodentv will keep bringing you the latest on global politics in our upcoming clips. Stay tuned.
Cảm ơn các bạn đã lắng nghe. Đừng quên nhấn đăng ký và like để không bỏ lỡ bất kỳ tin tức mới nào. Hãy chia sẻ video này để thông tin được lan tỏa đến nhiều người hơn và để lại bình luận để chúng ta cùng thảo luận. Theo dõi kênh meodentv để cập nhật những tin tức nóng hổi nhất. Cảm ơn các bạn một lần nữa.